Katie was 10 years old when she and her mother moved to a new house in another city. Her mother, Sarah, began dating a man named Michael, who had a son named Evan. He was a year older than Katie and at first glance seemed detached and silent to her. "Evan, meet, it's Katie, she will live with us," Michael said to his son. Evan just nodded and walked into his room, leaving Katie a little confused. At first, it was difficult for them to get along under the same roof. Evan was used to silence, and Katie, on the contrary, was a cheerful and loud girl. But over time, they began to find a common language. They did homework together, helped around the house and even walked the family dog that Michael got for family reunification. The connection that has grown over the years. Years passed, and their relationship became stronger. Katie and Evan became true friends. They prepared for exams together, shared secrets and supported each other in difficult moments. When Katie turned 17, she began to notice that her feelings for Evan had changed. He was no longer just her stepbrother, something more was being born in her heart. One evening, when they were sitting on the roof of the garage and looking at the stars, Evan suddenly said, "Katie, you know, I always thought you were the best person in my life." She looked at him in surprise. "Do you really think so?" "Yes. Sometimes it seems to me that if it weren't for you, I would have lost myself a long time ago." Katie felt her heart pound faster. She wanted to say something in response, but the words were stuck in her throat. Recognition. A few weeks later, Evan dared to confess his feelings to her. "Katie, I know it may sound weird, but I'm in love with you," he said, looking into her eyes. Katie held her breath. "Me too, Evan. What will our parents think?" Their feelings were mutual, but they understood that the situation was complicated. Sarah and Michael, although they were in a relationship, could not accept it. Parents' reaction. When Katie and Evan finally told their parents about their feelings, Sarah and Michael were shocked at first. "You're not blood relatives, but we didn't expect that," Sarah said. "This is wrong," Michael added, but his voice later became softer. "But I see that's serious." Sarah and Michael tried to accept the situation, because they knew that the bands could only remove their children. Love in spite of everything. A year later, Katie and Evan's parents separated. They realized that their connection no longer brings happiness. Sarah moved in again, but Katie decided to stay by Evan's side. Their relationship only strengthened. They entered the same university together and rented a small apartment. Their love seemed unbreakable. They experienced ridicule from the environment, condemnation and misunderstanding, but this only made them stronger. New life. When Katie and Evan turned 25, they got married. They built their home filled with laughter, love and shared memories. Their story has become an example that true love knows no limits and stereotypes. A few years after Kathy and Evan got married, their life seemed perfect. They dreamed of the future, built their own house and lived in peace. But one day this idyll broke off. Katie was returning home after a walk when she was hit by a car at a pedestrian crossing. It happened suddenly, and her life was in danger. Evan, having received the terrible news, immediately rushed to the hospital. "She's in a coma," said the doctor, holding Evan's shoulder. "We'll do our best, but we have to be prepared for anything." Evan stayed by her side every day. He told her even though she couldn't answer. He talked about their love, their lives, their dreams. He believed she could hear him. It was almost a year that Katie finally opened her eyes. All the medical staff was shocked by her recovery. But Evan's joy quickly changed to anxiety when he saw Katie looking at him with a completely blank look. "Who are you?" she asked. Those words were like a blow to him. Katie didn't remember him. She didn't remember anything from her past. Psychologists explained that Katie can restore memory, but it takes time. Evan, her mother Sarah and Michael collected all the photos, memories and things that could help. At first it seemed useless. Katie looked at the pictures, listened to the stories, but they were strangers to her. The therapist who worked with her was advised to focus on the main emotions that can awaken memories. One day, when Evan came to her with a bouquet of red tulips, Katie suddenly held her gaze on the flowers. "Tulips," she whispered. "They mean something." "These are our flowers," Evan said, barely holding back his tears. "We planted them together near our house." Katie didn't remember everything at once, but something changed in her heart. She began to remember the little things, his voice, their walks, how he held her hand. Evan was the first person she recognized. "I remember you," she said one evening, and these words were the best gift in his life. Although Katie gradually regained her memory and her life with Evan returned to normal, a new trouble came. Her mother Sarah began to lose her sight. Doctors diagnosed progressive optic nerve atrophy. "Mom, we will do anything to help," Katie said, hugging her. But the disease progressed, and soon Sarah was completely blind. Her condition worsened, and a year later she died. This loss was a heavy blow to Katie. Evan was by her side, supporting her in the darkest moments. It's been a few years since Katie regained her memory and survived the loss of her mother. Her life with Evan was full of love, care, and warmth. They lived peacefully, planned trips, dreamed of children and just enjoyed every day together. However, fate again prepared a difficult challenge for them. One day, Katie noticed that something was wrong with her eyesight. At first, it was almost imperceptible. She could not recognize the small text or notice the details in the distance. But every day the problem became more serious. "It's probably just overwork," she told Evan, trying to calm him down. But when even the strongest glasses couldn't help her see clearly, Evan insisted that she go to the doctor. After several examinations, the doctor reported the alarming news: Katie had a rare form of retinal degeneration and her eyesight deteriorated rapidly. "We can try to stop the process, but unfortunately, it is impossible to restore what has already been lost," the doctor said. Katie was stunned. Her gaze flint on Evan, who was holding her hand. "We'll manage, Katie," he said confidently. "As always. Together." Katie began a course of treatment, but every day it became more difficult for her to navigate in space. Evan did everything to support her. He helped her walk, read her favorite books aloud, and even converted the house to make it easier for her to move. One day, when they were sitting in the garden, Katie said, "You know, I'm afraid. Not that I am completely blind, but that I will forget what you look like, our home, our tulips." Evan hugged her. "You will never forget it, because I will always be there to remind you." A few months later, Katie completely lost her sight. Her life has changed dramatically. But Evan didn't let her give up. He found courses for people with visual impairments, where she learned to use a cane and even mastered Braille. Evan became her eyes in everything. He described the world around her, drew landscapes with words and reminded her every day how strong she was. "We will live many more wonderful years," he once said as they were walking through the garden. "I believe you," Katie replied, clutching his hand. Katie learned to live without sight, but she always felt the light next to her. The light that Evan gave her with his words, care and love. Their life was not easy, but they proved that love can overcome even the most difficult trials. And although Katie never saw her favorite tulips anymore, she always smelled their scent and knew that Evan was always there to be her light. Evan continued to support Katie, helping her adjust to her new life. He often said that her strength and courage inspire him more than anything else. She joked that he was now her guide in the world of light, and even in the darkest moments, her soul was filled with warmth from his love. One spring day, when the tulips near their house had already begun to blow, Evan decided to do something special for Katie. He took it to the garden, put it on a bench and began to describe each flower, its shades, how they look in the sun. "I can't see them, but I feel them with all my heart," Katie said. "You do everything to keep this world beautiful for me." Evan replied, "You are the one making the world beautiful for me." Their lives were filled with such moments, simple but real. They celebrated small victories together, supported each other in difficulties and did not allow circumstances to destroy what they had built. After a few years, when Katie was already fully accustomed to the new lifestyle, they decided it was time to share their experiences with others. They began volunteering in an organization for people with visual impairments, helping them find new meaning in life. Katie became an example of how not to give up even in the darkest times, and Evan became a symbol of unlimited support and devotion. Together they created a world around themselves filled with warmth, love and light that never goes out. Years passed, and the lives of Katie and Evan gradually changed, but their love remained unchanged. Their house, surrounded by a garden of red tulips, became a place where other people came for support and inspiration. Their neighbors, friends and even complete strangers often said that their history gives hope to those who need it. One day, during another volunteer event, a young girl approached Katie. She also lost her sight and could not find the strength to continue living. "How did you manage to accept it?" she asked, on the verge of tears. Katie took her hand and said, "I have a man who reminds me that even in the dark you can find light. But you know, this light is always in you. It must be sought, even if at first it seems impossible." The girl cried, but this time her tears were tears of hope. Katie and Evan continued to live their lives filled with small joys and great feelings. One day they decided to plant new tulips again, as a symbol of new beginnings. "Every year, these flowers remind me that we overcame everything together," Katie said when they finished the work. Evan smiled. "And they remind me how much I love you." At sunset, they sat on a bench near their house, listening to birdsong and smelling the aroma of freshly planted tulips. Their life, although not always easy, remained bright and full of love. This story continued not only in their hearts, but also in the hearts of those who drew strength and inspiration from their example. Katie and Evan proved that even in the darkest times, true love can light the way. One day, when spring blossomed again and their garden was filled with red tulips, Katie began to notice disturbing symptoms. She often felt tired, headache and weakness. Evan insisted that she go to the doctor, and after lengthy examinations, she was given a terrible diagnosis, a rare genetic disease that once took her mother's life. Doctors did everything possible to slow the progression of the disease, but time was inexorable. Katie knew that this was her last spring, but she didn't let sadness overshadow her last months. "I don't want you to remember me as weak," she said to Evan one evening. "You have always been and will always be the strongest person in my life," he replied, clenching her hand. They spent the last months together, enjoying every moment. They walked in the garden, told each other memories of happy times and met the sunsets together. Katie asked Evan to fulfill her last wish, to plant even more tulips in their garden after she left, so that every spring would be a reminder of the love they shared. One morning, when the sun was gently illuminating their bedroom, Katie passed away peacefully. She left this world with the same tenderness with which she has always lived, and surrounded by what she loved most, Evan and the smell of blooming tulips. Evan was overwhelmed with grief, but he complied with her request. The following spring, he planted dozens of new tulips in their garden. Each of them became a symbol not only of her life, but also of the strength of their love, which did not fade even after her departure. He often sat on the bench near the flowers, remembering how they laughed together, dreamed and overcame difficulties. And although Katie was no longer around, her spirit remained with him in every petal, in every ray of sunshine that touched the flowers. "You will always be my light, Katie," he whispered, looking at the blooming tulips. This story is not only about love that overcomes obstacles, but also about the power of memory that remains with us even after loss. Evan continued to live, carrying in his heart the light that Katie once gave him and sharing this love with the whole world. Years passed, but the pain of losing Katie never completely left Evan. However, he learned to live with this pain, turning it into something else: strength and gratitude for the moments they spent together. Every spring their garden bloomed with red tulips. It was a reminder not only of Katie, but also of how love can stay alive even after death. Evan often walked around the garden, talking to her mentally as if she were nearby. One day, Henry, Noah's son, who was now an adult, came to see him. Henry always admired Uncle Evan and considered him the wisest person he knew. "Dunkle," Henry said, sitting down next to him on the garden bench. "I was always wondering how you could stand it all." Evan looked at his nephew with a slight smile. "Love, Henry. It not only gives strength, but also stays with you, even when the person leaves. Katie left me much more than the pain of loss. She left me a life full of meaning." Henry thought, looking at the flowers. "Sometimes I wonder if I can ever find love like you and Katie." Evan put his hand on his shoulder. "You will find. But remember, love is not always easy. It requires patience, trust, and a willingness to fight for it." Henry often visited Evan after that conversation. He helped take care of the garden, listened to stories about Katie, and learned the lessons that his uncle passed on with such sincerity. In the end, Evan decided to do something special to leave a legacy of their history. He began writing a book about their lives with Katie, describing every detail of their love, struggles and victories together. The book became a kind of letter to it, a story that was supposed to inspire others to appreciate the moments they have with their loved ones. When the book was finished, Evan published it under the title Red Tulips, the love story that overcame everything. She quickly found a response in people's hearts, inspiring them to live with love and gratitude. Evan lived a long life, but even in his old age, his memories of Katie remained vivid. And when he passed away, he was buried next to her, in their favorite garden, among the red tulips that have always been a symbol of their eternal love. The garden remained a place where people came to remember them and be inspired by the power of love that knows no limits. Their story continued to live in the hearts of those who heard it, reminding that true love never fades away. A few years after Evan's death, the red tulip garden became almost legendary. People from all over the county came to see this place full of love stories. The garden was cared for by Henry and his family, who continued the tradition of planting new tulips every spring, as did Katie and Evan. Once, among the guests who came to the garden, there was a young woman named Eliza. She read Evan's book and was so impressed with their story that she wanted to see this legendary garden with her own eyes. "It's so beautiful," she said to Henry when he met her at the entrance. "It's more than just a garden," Henry replied. "It's the place where their love lives." Eliza was a writer, and after hearing the story from Henry himself, she decided to write a script for a film based on the life of Katie and Evan. "Your family has inspired thousands of people," she said to Henry. "This story should be seen by the whole world." Henry, although a little cautious, agreed to help her. Together they began working on the project, collecting old photos, letters and diaries left over from Katie and Evan. The film became a real hit. Viewers around the world were moved by the story of their love, which went through hardships, losses, and still remained strong. After the success of the film, the garden with red tulips became a place of pilgrimage. People came to leave notes with their stories, plant flowers, or just find inspiration. Henry continued to take care of the garden, knowing that his uncle and aunt would always remain part of this place. One day, when he was walking among the tulips with his children, he told them, "This garden is not only about Katie and Evan. It's about how important it is to love, appreciate every moment, and never be afraid to fight for those who are dear to you." The children nodded, and one of them said, "We'll plant our tulips here too, Dad." And so the story continued, passed down from generation to generation. Red tulips have become not only a symbol of Katie and Evan's love, but also a reminder to everyone that love is a force that can change the world and leave a trace in it forever. Decades passed, and the garden with red tulips continued to live and flourish. Over the years, it has turned into a real reserve, where people came not only from all over the country, but also from all over the world. In the center of the garden stood a small monument with the inscription, "Kathy and Evan, the love that over one time." In addition, there was a small museum nearby, which housed photographs, letters, notes, and even copies of the book Evan wrote. This place has become a symbol of the strength of the human soul, capable of loving and fighting, no matter what. One day, a young boy named Luke came to the museum. He was going through a difficult period in his life. He recently lost a loved one and could not find the strength to move on. "I was told that this place can help," he said. Henry, who has now become the keeper of the museum and garden. "It helps everyone who is ready to open their hearts," Henry replied. "As you know, this story is not just about loss. It's about how love can stay with us even after the people we love leave." Henry showed Luke the garden, told him the story of Katie and Evan. The boy was so moved that he decided to leave a note in the museum with the words, "Thank you for reminding me that love is stronger than pain. You gave me hope." This note became one of the thousands that were kept in the museum. They were part of the legacy that Katie and Evan left behind, without even realizing how much their story would affect the lives of others. When Luke returned home, he began to write his own story. Inspired by the example of Katie and Evan, he wanted to share his experience to help others. Years passed, and the garden with red tulips remained unchanged. Every spring, new flowers appeared in it, planted by people who felt the power of love thanks to this story. One day, when Henry was already old, he was sitting on a bench in the garden with his grandchildren. "Grandpa, you always say that this garden is not just flowers," said one of his granddaughters. "What is it really like?" Henry smiled and replied, "It's a place where love never goes out." And at this moment, the tulips, luminous by the gentle rays of the sun, seemed brighter than ever, reminding everyone that true love lives forever. The garden with red tulips has turned into a place where the past and the future were intertwined. People who came here left their stories, planted new flowers and found answers to their most difficult questions. One summer day, Henry's grandson, 18-year-old Lila, decided to take care of the garden and the museum. Her grandfather was already old, and she wanted to continue his business, knowing how important this place is to their family and to the people of the whole world. "Grandpa, I want this garden to continue to live even when I'm gone," she said, helping him to trim the branches near the tulips. "It's great, Lilo," Henry replied. "But remember, the main thing is not only to take care of the garden, but also the story he tells." Lila decided to create a digital archive, in which she added all the notes, letters and photos collected in the museum. She also launched a website where everyone could share their love or loss story, inspired by the example of Kathy and Evan. In a short time, the site became popular, and people from all over the world began to send their stories. Some of them were joyful, others sad, but they all had a common feature: they were about the power of love. Lila also made a short film about the garden and its history. She wanted the new generation to know how important it is to appreciate loved ones and believe that love can change lives. The film won many awards and attracted even more people to the garden. One day, while Lila was walking through the garden, she saw a young couple planting red tulips. "Why did you decide to come here?" she asked. "We read the story of Katie and Evan," the girl replied. "She helped us understand that even after a difficult time, you can find happiness." Layla smiled. "I am glad that this garden continues to inspire people." When Henry went into eternity, Lila spent the whole day in the garden. She sat on a bench where he liked to tell her stories and thought about how far the inheritance of Katie and Evan stretched. She realized that the garden is more than just a place. This is a living memory that reminds us that love has no limits in time and space. And even after centuries, the red tulips continued to bloom, passing the story from generation to generation about how love changes the world.